flour, lemon, ice water, eggs, and grease.
Man, there's been so much racism at these Trump rallies. There was the brown woman who was pushed around and called black bitch scum. Then there was the brother who was punched in the face by the 78-year-old white man, and the police tackled him as opposed to tackling his attacker, who was thankfully later arrested. And Stacey Dash posted an article at the Pathos website where she writes conservative articles. And we all know by now that conservatism is a mental disease. It's a mental disorder. And it'll probably be added, to the list of disorder. You remember back in the day, they used to say that homosexuality was like, a mental issue or whatever, a mental deficiency. And it's funny because conservatism is replacing homosexuality, which, if you ask me, maybe both of them should be looked into. Liberalism is also a mental disorder, but that concept will be destroyed later on in the future. But as of right now, as a matter of fact, I'm going to make a separate video where I'm going to explain why conservatism is a mental disorder and why basically conservatives are no longer needed. And when they get round up and thrown into concentration camps, just remember, things like this are exactly why that's going to happen. Anyway, Stacey Dash posted an article on Pathos back on March 11th of 2016. It's titled, "No, Trump isn't responsible for the violence at his rallies." Let's see what your girl Stacey Dash, who I used to just think was so fine back in the day. I mean, I'd still smash, but that's a whole nother story. She wrote, and I quote, "There's a lot of talk about Donald Trump being violent, condoning it, or at least enticing it. But this is a total misread of our next president. First of all, he's not responsible for what every random guy does out of thousands. And by the way, I don't condone the violence that has happened so far." So let me just pause the story to interject something right here. First of all, she referred to him as our next president. I saw a news article with different drawings, different cartoon depictions from around the world where people were basically expressing what they think about Donald Trump. They basically, in so many words, called him a Nazi, a dictator, and a narcissist. So many different things, and I'll make a separate video about that where I basically talk about that, and I'll give you guys the link in that particular video, so you guys can go ahead and see those images for yourself. I mean, it was something to marvel at. It's amazing the poor image that he has around the world, and it's funny because Barack Obama, a lot more people like him around the world, and that's very important because, we talk about welfare. The true welfare system is warfare. All of the money in America pretty much just being wasted is going to the military. And the military needs to be defunded immediately, but that's a whole nother video in itself because they're a waste of welfare. But I'll talk about that another time. Anyways, she said, and by the way, I don't, wait, let me bring it back. First of all, he's not responsible for what every random guy does out of thousands. And by the way, I don't condone the violence that has happened so far. Out of thousands? Are you saying that thousands of people have committed violence or are willing to commit violence, or do you just mean that there were thousands of people there? Because the thousands of people are motivated to commit acts of violence. I mean, pretty much, they need to go ahead and fill up the jails with these people, take some of those innocent people that are in there out and put these damn Trump supporters in there. If they're out there just willing to commit acts of violence like that, if they're that big of a threat to America. Anyway, she goes on to say, second of all, he's not violent. He's just quote unquote street. Yes, Stacey Dash referred to Donald Trump as being a street guy. Yes, Idris Elba was accused of being too street to play James Bond in a movie, but Donald Trump is street, and it's a good idea for him to become the president of the United States, according to Stacey Dash. She goes on to say he was born in Queens. Of course, that doesn't mean he was hustling on the streets, dodging bullets. I know he had a privileged upbringing that no doubt isolated him from much of the violence and strife that some people grew up with in the city. I, for example, grew up in the South Bronx. I saw my first dead body when I was 3. I still remember the look on his face to this day. But growing up there in New York made me see the world in a certain way. Actions have consequences. Pause the story. She saw a body dead on the street when she was 3 years old. And this is when she had a realization as a 3-year-old that actions have, or rather at some point in her life, she realized this growing up, actions have consequences. Is she trying to say that this man caused his own death? Let me guess. He was black, wasn't he? Get it? Wink, wink. In other words, he must have done something wrong to end up dead. He was murdered, more than likely, and he must have deserved it. He must have done something wrong. Do you think that she would say the same thing if it was a dead white woman? Or do you think she would automatically assume that the dead white woman, which is somebody who she would identify with, a white female, don't you think that she would probably say that that person was a victim of being murdered? But since it was most likely a black man or so-called man of color, she doesn't identify with that. So, actions have consequences. That's very dismissive. And if actions have consequences, then what are going to be the consequences for the people who are doing the things that they're doing at these Trump rallies? Because I still haven't seen her so far in this article, and we're about halfway through it. I haven't really seen her, truly condemn these acts of violence. I haven't seen her say these people need to be arrested. You have no right putting your hands on people or anything like that. And I don't condone that woman being pushed around and that man being punched and the other acts of violence. No, she didn't take it there. This is about spinning the story around and saying, hey, everybody, that violence that you see at the Trump rallies is just us reacting. When in reality, this is them acting. This is them taking violent and aggressive actions against people. They're not reacting to shit. Now, what we do to them is going to be a reaction. And for every action is a greater reaction. So what are going to be the consequences for what you terrorists and you thugs are doing? That's the real question. Anyway, she goes on to say, rude people are not tolerated. Pause the story. Rude people are not tolerated. Yeah, let's not tolerate Donald Trump. Donald Trump has to be the rudest presidential candidate I've ever seen in my freaking life. How dare she say rude people are not tolerated in a pro Donald Trump article? I mean, the irony in that. It reminds me of what Chris Rock was saying about how Jada Pinkett wasn't invited to the damn Oscars. Like you thought that you would ever be nominated? This is about as delusional as people who are against abortion. They claim to be pro-life, but yet they turn around talking about some support the troops. Yeah. It's just complete delusion. And people need to be called out for this foolishness. How are you going to say support the troops? I hope you come home alive. Go ahead over there and kill all these people. But by the way, I'm pro-life. No, you're pro-death. You might be against people being killed one way, but you're for another. Just complete delusion. But anyways, she goes on to say, rude people are not tolerated. If you attack me, I'll come back at you twice as hard. Rather, twice at hard. Not as hard, but at hard. Stacy, please proofread the comedy routine next time. It's funny because these people, basically she's victim blaming. These people were attacked on camera. There's no denying what the hell happened. Racial slurs caught on camera. And she's turning around talking about, hey, if you attack me, I'll come back at you twice at hard. Stacy, they were the ones who were attacked. The only thing you're right about is that that's what we need to do to you. We need to attack you twice as hard. But here's where the article just went straight to hell. Now, this is hilarious here. Stacy goes on to say, in fact, I got into my share of fights. Yes, real honest to God street fights. I actually detail many of them in my upcoming book, There Goes My Social Life, From Clueless to Conservative. Pre-order it to find out my main strategy for winning fights, even though I always found myself fighting people twice my size. Yes, this bitch is teaching self-defense techniques and bragging about all the fights that she's been in. Yes, Stacey Dash is telling everybody that she's been in a bunch of fights and she knows how to beat people the fuck up, and this is how you do it. Yes, Stacey Dash is going to teach you how to cunt punt. She's going to teach you clueless karate. Stacey Dash Jeet Kune Do. She's not bullshitting. Yes, this is a real article. Let me reread that part because this is just too good. I wish I had a cup of tea sitting here. Anyway, she goes on to say, in fact, I got into my share of fights. Yes, real honest to God street fights. I actually detail many of them in my upcoming book. There Goes My Social Life, From Clueless to Conservative. Pre-order it to find out my main strategy for winning fights, even though I always found myself fighting people twice my size. Anyway, I'm not saying that Donald Trump grew up slamming people's heads into walls, but there is something about growing up in New York, a certain toughness instilled, a certain level of quote-unquote street that can't be ignored. At least that's how it worked out with Trump. That's why Americans love him. They are tired of being pushed around. They want someone who will not put up with nonsense. Pause. I'm sorry, I had to pause one time. Literally, that black woman was pushed around at the freaking rally. Literally. She's not saying anything in her defense. She's talking about people. The irony of her talking about people being pushed around when literally there's people being pushed around at these rallies, and she's not even mentioning it at all. This is. Anyway, she goes on to say, remember Mitt Romney's, quote, no apology tour? I love it that he did that tour. I voted for Romney and don't regret it. Romney, yeah, you want a Mormon in office? Do you know what the freaking Mormons think about black people? They think that black people were cast out of heaven and are demons. They also believe, what is it, that God has billions of spirit children in heaven. So he was just busting billions of sperm cells into billions of wives. Just Mormons believe it's some old weird shit. But anyways, she goes on to say Romney is a gentleman. You mean a racist? Anyways, Romney is a gentleman, almost too good to do what needs to be done. But what he tried to do, Donald is actually doing. He's not apologizing. He's not backing down. He knows both sides of the street. He knows the game. And he knows how to win it. And win it is in capital letters. So apparently she wanted to put extra emphasis on that. Like I've said, he doesn't bring a knife to a gunfight. Well, of course he doesn't bring a knife to a gunfight, Stacy. He said that he could shoot somebody on, what was it, 5th Street in New York, and he wouldn't lose one vote. If that's not brainwashing, I don't know what is. Yes, literally, Donald. Listen, if you need the video, say, hey, where's the video of Donald Trump talking about how he could shoot somebody and not lose votes? If that's not some street thugged out shit, I don't know what is. And the thing I love about all of this is that young brown men get called thugs every day, but it's these rich Caucasian men that are in politics and all sort of establishment, pseudo professional fields and whatnot that are the real thugs. And this is just more proof of it. He's going to sit up there and run for the presidency of the United States of America in the year 2016 and say that basically he could just shoot somebody and he wouldn't lose any votes, and the KKK is backing him, and nobody on their quote unquote side finds any of this to be disturbing. That's why these conservatives are going to be thrown in concentration camps. Remember where you heard it first. That's what's going to happen. She goes on to say, and that's why we support him. I'll leave you with this. So she was done talking, but she posted a Frederick Douglass quote. This is what she said. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh, Stacy Dash, you're the worst. I still would, bang Stacy Dash. I'm not gonna front, but as a matter of fact, I would bang the conservative out of her. I really would. But anyways, Stacy, you're gonna regret all this stuff that you're saying because certain people behind the scenes that do what they do have certain dissidents on lists. Your name is on a list somewhere saying shit like this because it's completely unreasonable. But I'm going to talk about those lists that are out there and the true plan for people like Stacy and really not Donald. they might move him to an island somewhere where he'll be able to retire or whatever. But yeah, in the near future, basically these people were going to be looked at as like how they look at an Al-Qaeda or an ISIS or whatever. That's what the conservative party is going to be. There's really no need for them anymore, because as far as the whole depopulation agenda is considered in the Georgia Guidestones and all that stuff, listen, conservatism is not needed anymore in America. But I'll talk about that another time, because that's some very interesting information. Let me know what you think about Stacey Dash's dumb article below. Be sure to subscribe to the Meat Magazine YouTube channels. Visit meatmagazine.blogspot.com. Follow me on Twitter at Meat Magazine. And for the record, there's a link on my blog that will take you to this Pathos article if you want to read it for yourself for any reason. Meat Magazine.